Dad kicked me out so my golden child half-brother could move in. But 6 months later they're begging me to lie to cover up his crime or they'll go to jail. I, male, turned 18 about 4 months ago and my dad kicked me out 6 months back because my jerk half-brother Derek, 24M, decided that he was moving back here, and he didn't want to rent out a place like a normal person, so he wanted to live with my dad. For context, Derek is my dad's son from his first relationship. But Derek's mother and my dad broke up soon after he was born, so they didn't really have much of a relationship afterward. Derek is a lot closer to my dad than he is to his mother, so we spent a lot of time together growing up because he would come over more often than was required legally as per his custody arrangement. I'm pretty sure that he was supposed to spend half of the month with my father, but I remember being around him all the time, or maybe that was just my brain exaggerating things because I hated spending time with him, but my dad forced us together. I also know for a fact that he didn't like me much and saw me as a threat to him. My mother passed away a couple of years ago after a long battle with lung cancer, and that's when things started going downhill with me and my dad. Don't get me wrong, things have been bad between me and my dad ever since I was a kid. I guess my father didn't really want a kid like me. Or maybe, he didn't even want a kid at all. Whatever it was, he treated me weirdly when I was little and it almost always felt like he didn't want me around most of the time. He would always be mad at me and yell at me for the smallest things. He would never show me any affection, and even when I tried to win him over, it would be met with nothing but coldness. But with Derek, he was a different person altogether. Whenever Derek would be around the house, he would suddenly turn into the best father in the world and do everything that I wanted him to do with me. He forced him and I to spend time together, even though both of us had made it very clear that we didn't like each other. Derek didn't like me because I was a threat, and I didn't like him because he would always bully me when I was a kid. He would always try his best to lock horns with me and push me around all the time just because he could. He knew that he would get away with it too, because my father would never say a word against him. Whenever I would complain to my dad about Derek being rough with me, he would tell me to suck it up and deal with it because that's apparently how boys were supposed to play, and he didn't want me to grow up and be a pansy. And I thought that's what my father wanted from me. So eventually, I learned to suck it up and just let it happen. I would never fight back, because I didn't want to piss my dad off, and I knew that fighting with Derek was one sure-shot way of having him yell at me. It didn't even matter if Derek was screwing things up for me or not. If I fought with him, I was always the one in the wrong. My dad never cared about the story. Whatever happened, I was the bad guy. It was pretty obvious that he had a favorite, and it wasn't me. Not even for a second did he find it weird that Derek was picking on me even though I was a full 6 years younger than him. And then slowly, he started changing his ways of bullying me, because physically hitting me wasn't cutting it anymore. He was also growing up, so when he started high school, he switched to bullying me with his friends instead. Before that, school had been my safe place because I was still in elementary school when he was in middle school, and we had different buildings so he couldn't get to me there. But once I started middle school, we were in the same building and he and his friends were ganging up on me and making fun of me all the time. They would even spread stupid nasty rumors about me like I was apparently mentally challenged, and all the seniors knew that I was Derek's idiotic little younger brother. I'm not even kidding, that's exactly what they used to call me. They would even call me slurs, and it really made things difficult for me because when kids start middle school, they start caring more about their reputation. So now even the friends that I had from elementary school wouldn't speak to me because I was not cool enough to hang out with anyone. It wasn't until Derek graduated that I finally had the school to myself and could exist in peace. I did have a couple of friends, but most people just believed them, and I would let them get away with it because I was so exhausted from putting up a fight all the time that I couldn't even bear to argue with people. At home, things were just as bad as ever because Derek and my father would never pass up on an opportunity to put me down and make me feel like an idiot. And the funniest part was that I wasn't even an idiot. I had pretty decent grades and I was great at science and stuff, but my dad and Derek didn't care about that. Derek was a football player, and the cherry on top of that, he was actually a pretty great student as well. See, you guys can imagine how bad things must have been for me at home. Derek was everything that I was not: athletic, academically strong, and just the kind of son that my father had wanted. On the other hand, there was me, who was average in every sense of the word. They never missed an opportunity to remind me of just how insignificant and average I was. My mother tried to defend me most of the time, but my dad was a real sweet talker, and he would convince my mother that they were just messing around with me and they didn't mean anything that they said. My mother was generally a nice and sweet person, but she was also really in love with my father, so she never saw him for what he truly was. She would try her best to defend me, and I appreciated her for it, but it didn't work. Because it wasn't enough, and my father along with Derek continued to bully me for as long as they could. And then, finally, Derek went away to college, and I felt like I could breathe a sigh of relief. My dad would still be around, but he was significantly less annoying to deal with when the other jerk wasn't with him. But before I could find out what it was like to live with my parents without Derek constantly picking on me, my mother was diagnosed with lung cancer. It was incredibly difficult for us to come to terms with it because we felt like our world had shattered. The only thing that my father and I had in common was that both of us loved our mother dearly. So her diagnosis really broke us both, but instead of making our family stronger, my dad decided that he was going to make the worst of this. My mother was already suffering. But now, instead of my father and I putting up a brave front for her, he started distancing himself from her even more. Earlier, he would at least speak to me only if it was to take digs at me, but after my mom's diagnosis, he stopped doing even that and started pretending like I didn't exist at all. I can cut him some slack for that, because both of us were suffering, and he just chose to deal with the suffering in a different way. I would have preferred if my mom's predicament brought us closer together somehow, but clearly, that was not meant to be. And even if it was meant to be, my dad was the kind of person who would make sure that it didn't happen, because, for some reason, he just hated me and couldn't bear the thought of me being happy. With time, my mom's condition only got worse, and my dad's temper also started taking a toll on me. Because he would either not speak to me at all and ignore me completely, or he would be absolutely nasty to me, and there were several occasions where he almost made me cry because of how rude he was being. I tried my best to keep the peace of the family by not responding to my father because I knew that it would just give him more of a reason to berate me and pick on me. For the years that my mother was sick, whenever Derek would come back home from college, he would lay off of me, and I appreciated that. He would not be nice to me, but he would at least be human, and that's more than what I could ask for. Things were bad when my mother was still around, but after she passed away, I went from the frying pan into the fire. For the first couple of months, after my mother's passing, things were really quiet around the house. And by that, I mean that I would do all the work while my dad was just unresponsive. He would function, he would go to work, come back, and have dinner and stuff, but nothing else. I was kind of concerned for him, and I contacted my grandparents several times to tell them that I thought my father was probably depressed, but they didn't take me seriously. They either didn't care enough about their son to check up on him after the funeral, or they just didn't like me, just like my father, and didn't want to do as I said. But after a few months had passed, my father started coming to his normal self. Unfortunately, that also included binge drinking and making me feel like crap about myself yet again. He would constantly order me to do stuff around the house, and it was really tiring because not only was I going to school, but I was also doing all the work around the house which my mother used to do earlier. Even when she was sick, my dad and I would manage to get all the work done, but after her passing, all that responsibility came to me. I couldn't even protest because if I did, my father would tell me that I wasn't bringing home any money, so this is the least that I could do to live here. It was really insulting, but I had nowhere else to go, so I just had to suck it up and deal with it for the longest time. The only thing that I was looking forward to was going to college, because that would mean that I would finally be rid of my father and I wouldn't have to come back home. Anyway, I didn't even consider this place home anymore, because once my mom was gone, it stopped being home for me. Now I could have moved out and started living with my mom's parents after her, but they live really far away and I still had a year of school left, so that was not an option for me. But then a couple of months ago, when my father found out that his golden child would be coming back home, he kicked me out anyway, and I ended up moving to live with my grandparents. Derek had moved out for college a couple of years ago, but he hadn't returned to live here after that. After he had graduated, he got a job there and decided to stay because his girlfriend wanted to stay there and make a life for themselves away from home. So Derek decided to stay there with her and would only come back for the holidays occasionally. About 2 years ago, he got married to his girlfriend because she was pregnant. They had just graduated when they found out, and it seemed like pretty perfect timing, so they decided to get heat. I was invited to the wedding surprisingly, and just for that. One day, he did not terrorize me. My mother was also present there, in spite of her condition. Because even though he didn't like it, everybody liked my mom. And he wasn't particularly close to his own mother since she was kind of a bad mom. And I'm saying this because she was the kind of mother who just didn't care about their kid or having a relationship with their child. The woman was already in her 4th marriage by the time Derek got married, and it honestly appeared to me that her goal in life was to be rich. She worked and earned her own money, no doubt. But that was at the cost of her relationship with her son. I guess that explains why Derek was so attached to our father. He pretty much only had one parent who cared about him, and of course, he didn't want to share that parent with me. Anyway, Dad got married, and soon after, he had a kid as well. They have been living happily there for the past 2 years, but I don't know why. For some reason, 6 months ago, they decided to move back. My dad just informed me about it, like, 2 weeks before Derek was supposed to come home. He was really smug about it as well, and he sat me down one day and told me that I needed to find a place to live because Derek would be coming back home and I had to give up my room. We had 3 bedrooms, so I asked him why they couldn't just use the guest room. So he told me that Derek and his wife were going to live in the guest room and they were going to use my room as the nursery. It was apparently imperative that I leave the house because I was already enough since I was going to be an adult in just a few months. I thought it was really unnecessary and selfish of my father to demand that I leave the house altogether. Just because he wanted to move back here with his family. I tried to fight with my father, but there was no talking to him because he had already made up his mind. He told me that I had 2 weeks to clear out, and after that, if I didn't leave, then he would call the cops on me. Now, I am aware that there must have been some legal way to fight this and prevent it from happening, But at the time, it didn't occur to me and I was really panic-stricken because I didn't trust my father and I knew that he was fully capable of kicking me out without notice. So I started rushing to find a place for myself, but eventually, I settled on moving in with my grandparents. I had avoided doing that so far because they lived so far away and I still had to go to school, but at the time, I just didn't have any other options and there were just a couple of weeks of high school left at that point anyway, so I was willing to take that risk. Within days, I had moved out because I didn't want to be there when Derek came back home with his wife and child. My father didn't seem to care when I moved out and didn't even say goodbye to me the day that I had packed up and I was leaving with the movers. My grandparents had come all the way to pick me up in their truck and they had half a mind to tear into my father, but I told them not to do it because it just wasn't worth the drama. 6 months have passed since that day and I have been living with my grandparents. I haven't been in touch with my father ever since he kicked me out and I didn't plan on getting back in touch with him either. I was supposed to start college in a couple of weeks and that was already going to be taken care of. I had literally no incentive to speak to my dad or Derek ever again, but unfortunately, they were the ones who had to reach out to me because something had happened and they now needed me to bail them out. They visited me a couple of days ago and I was quite surprised because I hadn't been expecting them to reach out to me at any point. But my grandparents still let them in, and I decided to have a conversation with them because they seemed pretty desperate. I found out that apparently the reason Derek had come back here with his family was because he had lost his job earlier and was struggling to make rent, so he made the difficult choice of coming back here. His wife was alright with it because she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom and didn't want to work until their kid was a little older, so this was their best bet. When they came back, they expected to find work easily, but that was not the case because literally none of the companies around were hiring right now. And people with Derek's skill set were extremely common, so it wasn't as if he was a standout candidate either. But somehow, my father managed to get him a job in the company that he works in. Neither of them was happy about it because it paid a little less than what Derek used to make before, but that was all they had, so they had to make the best of their situation. But as it turns out, Derek had been stealing from the company for a couple of months now, and it had finally come to light a few weeks ago. And now my father and Derek are both in trouble because their employers think that they were in cahoots and threatening to file a lawsuit against them if they don't return the money soon enough. The only reason that they haven't been sued yet is because it's a family business and the CEO of the company used to be a great friend of my mom's. It's only out of respect for her that he hasn't filed a lawsuit against them yet for embezzlement, but he's not going to hold out for longer, and my father and Derek wanted me to help them out. They wanted me to claim that they needed the money for my college fund, which is why they had been stealing, and it was not for their own personal gain. My father believed that this would make him take it easy on us and buy them some time to return the money. They would still get fired, but at least they wouldn't end up going to prison because of this. They were counting on me to help them out and paint the perfect picture of being a poor little victim. I couldn't believe that they had the audacity to ask something like this of me after the way they had treated me their entire life. I said no almost instantly without even considering it because it was a crazy idea and I was pretty sure that it was not going to work. Their plan was simply ridiculous and I didn't want to be a part of it. When I told them that I didn't want to be a part of their plan, they started getting really agitated and told me that I had to help them out because there was a very real chance that they might end up going to jail and I couldn't let some petty grudge from years ago ruin their lives. So I told them that it wasn't a petty grudge, and it certainly wasn't from years ago. My father had only recently kicked me out and I hadn't even been a year since then, so I would say that it was pretty recent. But that wasn't even the main reason that I didn't want to help them. I just thought that their plan was really dishonest, and I actually happened to know the guy that my dad worked for. Like I said, my mother and he were really good friends and he also seemed to like me. He and my mother had pretty much grown up together and I used to refer to him as my uncle whenever he would come around when my mom was still alive. Even at her funeral, we had a nice conversation and we liked each other. My mom was actually the one who had told him to give my father a job in his company when my dad had been struggling. But instead of being thankful, not only had Derek decided to try and make a fool out of these people, but my dad was now trying to cover it all up and use me as a shield. I thought that it was really low, and I couldn't, in good conscience, be a part of this. So I told them that it would be in their best interest if they just tried to pay off whatever amount they had stolen instead of trying to cover it up with more lies and stuff. Because I wasn't going to be on their side here and they might end up going to jail if they tried to fool him again. In fact, they should even have been grateful that they were being given a chance to pay that money off and get out of this without a lawsuit that they would most definitely lose and that would ruin their future because they would definitely go to jail for it. They had no idea just how easy things were for them right now and exactly how complicated they could become if they decided to go through with their crazy plan. I tried to explain it to them, but my dad got really mad and said that he wasn't here to listen to a sermon from me, and if I wanted to help them, then I would agree to their plan instead of giving them advice that meant absolutely nothing. So I told him that I wasn't going to be a part of this, and to my surprise, my dad actually started crying. I had never seen this happen before and it made me feel really uncomfortable. He told me that he had been counting on me because I was his son at the end of the day, and no matter what had happened in the past, he knew that he would have helped me out if I was in a situation like this. He said that he expected the same of me because this was a huge deal and he really didn't want to go to prison. Derek also had the same sentiment and he was begging me to help them out because he knew that I was well. I liked it among my mom's friends and I was the only one who could build them out. My mom would have made this much easier, but since she was gone, I was the next best person to deal with it and they were banking on me. It was difficult, but I still had to turn them down and I tried to encourage them to just come clean and repay the money that they owed. They got really upset and said that the only reason I was screwing them over was because they used to mess with me when I was little and they were really disappointed with how I was dealing with things now. They left after that, but I keep thinking about it and the guilt is eating away at me because I keep imagining them in jail and I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. But at the same time, I don't want to be a part of something illegal, and so immoral. It would be an insult to my mother as well because I would technically be using her friendship and manipulating a really good friend of hers. I'm really conflicted right now about what I should do, and time is of the essence at the moment because it's not like my dad and Derek have forever to pay off their debts. So Ida for not wanting to lie and cover up for my dad and my half-brother, who bullied me my entire life. Update 1. I have made a decision and I think I'm gonna stick to not helping them out. Not only is it immoral and unethical, it's just straight up illegal. And I don't want to be a part of something like this, so if my dad and Derek want to stay out of jail then they will just have to sort this one out for themselves. And it's not even like they are in some grave danger, they have been given the opportunity to set things straight, repay all the money that Derek stole, and get out of this without tarnishing their reputation. They can choose to return all the money and fix this for themselves. So I have no reason to feel guilty. Most of the comments here suggested that I stay out of this, not just because my father and Derek were terrible people, but also because what they were doing was really horrible and I wouldn't be able to have this on my conscience and move on with it like they would be able to. It's clear that we are not made of the same stuff and I would not want to do something like this. So that's why I have chosen to stay out of it, and if they contact me after this, I will block them. For the record, they are already blocked everywhere. But I'm sure that they might use some different numbers or social media accounts to get to me. My grandparents also think that I'm doing the right thing by staying out of this because this is a mess that they made, so now they have to clean it up. It doesn't make sense to expect anything of me after the way they treated me for so long. Update 2. Hi. So my father reached out to me today through text, just like I had expected. It's been 8 days since he visited me last and we haven't spoken since then. As I had said, he used a different number that I wouldn't recognize to call me and I absent-mindedly answered the call as well. The second that I picked up the call, I hung up when I heard my father's voice on the other end. But I was a little too slow in blocking him, so he was able to text me and I received the text as well. He messaged me saying that he knew that I didn't want to discuss this any further, but he and Derek were in huge trouble and really needed me to help him out because their employer was breathing down their neck and threatening them every single day to return the money or else he would file a lawsuit against them. It made me feel very guilty, but I texted him back and told him that I wouldn't be helping him and he really should start looking for other ways to return the money instead of running away from the problem. Then I blocked him and I hope that he understands where I'm coming from. Even if he doesn't understand it, I just hope that he does the right thing. I would hate to have a father in prison. Update 3. Hey, so I haven't heard back from my father yet, but my grandparents told me that they had got in touch with my mom's friend, the CEO, to ask him what he was planning to do. We haven't contacted him before because he's a busy man and we didn't want to try too hard, but we needed to know what was going on, and speaking to my father or Derek was not an option anymore. So my grandpa spoke to him, and he told us that he was still planning on filing a lawsuit if he didn't receive the money back in a couple of months. He told us that he was willing to let it all pass because of his friendship with my mother, but he couldn't forgive the debt. And honestly, I respected that. He was being way more lenient than most people would have been in a situation like this. He even apologized to me and told me that he was sorry that this was happening to me, but I told him that it was no big deal, since I don't even live with my father anymore and he kind of deserves this. So, we don't know what is going to happen, but I think my dad is clever enough to know that he should really pay the amount back somehow so he doesn't end up in jail. It's going to take a while, but I'm sure that they'll do it and I have nothing to worry about. I also had a long chat with my mom's friend, and he told me that my mother had spoken to him before she passed away and said that if I ever wanted to intern somewhere for some quick cash, or maybe if I just wanted a job in general, his door would always be open. So that's nice to know and I'll keep that in mind going forward. Even after she's gone, my mom is still looking out for me and that really makes me happy. Stepdad moved his grown daughter into my childhood home without my permission, then packed my bags and kicked me out while I was at work and my mom is siding with them. I do not care if my mom is going to get mad. Her husband needs to leave. I have tried to get along with him, but it is impossible. I'm constantly made to feel as if I am inferior and a burden in this house. I have not spoken up in all the years that he has lived here. But he has been testing me, and this time, I am not going to take it. I know that my mother is going to call me as soon as she wakes up. That gives me a couple of hours due to the difference in time zone. I am prepared to stand my ground, even if it means I have to give her an ultimatum. She's not going to guilt trip me like she has done all these years. She's not going to force me to make peace with the wrong people. Anyone can see that my stepdad is entitled and disrespectful. How could he move his daughter into my house without permission? I'm sure it sounds ridiculous to you as it does to me. His daughter is 23 years old, has a job, and is a mother. She does not need to stay with us. That is what I told him 2 weeks ago because she kept on sleeping over for long periods. It felt like she was moving in, so L suggested that she start chipping in. He said that he needed to spend time with her and that I was just being jealous. So, I decided to keep quiet for the sake of my sanity. After that, it was an issue of so-called privacy. Can you believe this girl was demanding privacy from me? This is my parents' house and not hers. She got mad at me because I walked into the living room while she was on a video call. She then asked me to leave because it was a private phone call. I told her that there were many other rooms where she could take the call, so I was not going to leave. She then threw a massive tantrum, which her dad did not allow me to hear the end of. When she left, I told him that I was upset about her blatant disrespect. She was starting to make herself too much at home and making me feel uncomfortable. So I suggested that from now on they meet when I'm not at home or at her house. He got mad. He raised his voice at me and called me an ungrateful brat. He told me that this was because of my daddy issues. He said it was clear I was acting like this because I did not get enough attention. I was shocked at the audacity of this man. How dare he bring my father into this? So I did what his daughter had done to me. I went and told my mother what he said. I guess it was too much to ask her to take my side. She told me that I misunderstood him and that we should apologize to each other. I refused to apologize to him. So, I had been ignoring him for the past week. When my mom came back, I was planning to tell her that they would either move out or I would. After all, it is my father's house and my childhood home. But now it looks like a decision has to be made because this man went and did the most outrageous thing. I came home to find my stuff packed and outside. Attached to one of my suitcases was a note. It was my stepfather saying that I left him no other choice. He was tired of my attitude. He was not going to choose between his daughter and me, so it was clear that I needed to leave. It was so sad how our relationship had changed so quickly. When he first married my mom, he was a very good man. He did his best to be a father to me. We were very close, and I could come to him with any problem. And then, one day, his daughter visited us. She had just moved to town and started to spend a lot more time with her dad. I was excited to have another sibling, especially a girl. So I did all I could to make her feel welcome and like my sister. From the very beginning, I could see that she was not interested. She acted like she liked me in front of our parents. But when they were not there, she ignored me and pretended that I was not in her league. I said nothing of this to either of them. I just decided to distance myself from her and not make a big deal of it. Fast forward to now. She has basically infiltrated my home. My so-called stepfather has dropped his facade of being a good dad. I guess he has gotten so comfortable that his true colors are now coming out. I think he's also taking advantage of the fact that my mother is currently out of the country. My mother is often out of the country for months on end due to her line of work. She recently went back to work. She took a long break when my father passed away, and she had to take care of me. She ran a small business to support us. But after getting married, she decided that she wanted to give her career one more shot. I'm old enough to take care of myself, and my stepfather is here to help if anything is needed. I was very supportive of her decision and very proud of her. Now, I regret letting her go. It seems it has given my stepdad the courage to start mistreating me. That would explain why he has decided to move Sarah into the house and kick me out. The rest of the note went on to explain that I would only come back into the house if I apologized to my stepsister. If I did not, then I would have to look for my own place to stay. He refused to stay with someone who disturbed the peace and had no manners. Manners? He wanted to talk about manners when he was a spoiled brat and had no manners. I will show him manners. Though, I'm not sure what I'm going to do about this. But I'm not going to be kicked out of my house by a man who didn't buy it. Instead, I'm going to talk to my mother and let her know what happened. I'm going to tell her that my stepsister is not moving in. She is going to have to listen to me for once. I am not going to listen to her, she has to listen to me. I am the one who has to stay with these people 24/7. What I do next is dependent on her answer. Either solve this peacefully or start to have problems as a family. I would rather go with the former than the latter. Do you think that I am overreacting? Do you think that maybe I'm doing this out of jealousy? I am trying to get as much perspective as possible about this. What could justify kicking a person out without notice while they are at work? Is that not disrespect? Is that not unchecked audacity? The more I think about this, the madder I get. I think I'm done being nice. What do you think I should do? Update. Thank you all for your responses and comments. Rest assured that I've read everything that you've written. I have calmed down since the incident. I believe that the decision I've made is the best one at this point. I've tried to be an adult and polite. However, the people I'm dealing with do not respect that. When I called my mother as soon as she woke up, I wasted no time telling her what had been done to me. I expected her to be at least surprised and maybe enraged. I got none of that. Instead, she asked what I did wrong. She said that she was not surprised because David, my stepdad, had warned her about this. David told my mother that I had been rude and impossible to live with. I was mad to find out that David had been lying to my mother. So then I asked her where her loyalty stood. Was it with her daughter or the man she married? She said it had nothing to do with that. Her loyalty was to our family as a unit. She told me that David had told her he was going to move his daughter in. Apparently, he spoke to me about it, and I told him that I would rather move out. So, on the day that he moved his daughter in, he packed my stuff and kicked me out. There, you heard it straight. David and my mother planned to kick me out and replace me with his no-good daughter. I told my mother that I was highly disappointed in her decision-making. I also accused her of loving her new family over me. Clearly, she was trying to erase her past, which was me, and embrace her future, which was my stepdad and his daughter. She tried to deny it, but I wanted to hear none of her words. I told her that before I did anything severe, I was going to give her a chance to correct this. I let her know that they would have 24 hours to leave my father's house before I kicked them out single-handedly. And if they left, they could never come back. The only person who would be allowed back into the house was her. She lost it and actually tried to pin the whole thing on me. She said that I was changing and becoming ungrateful. She asked me how long I was going to push the people who cared about me away. Can you believe that she actually accused me of having a substance abuse problem? She was convinced that I was taking something that was making me feel irrational. It almost made me want to laugh. David's long game had actually worked. He had succeeded in getting my mother alone and kicking me out of the house. Of course, he has to be the stereotypical step-parent. I hung up on my mother and got ready for work. At work, I could hardly focus without music. Every time I didn't have music on, I was thinking about my conversation with my mother. I actually started to shake as I was thinking about this. The next thing I knew, I was having a full-blown panic attack. I have not had a panic attack since my father's memorial service. It was very hard for me to believe that he was gone, and I kept on dreaming about him. Then I saw someone at the memorial service who looked like him but turned to someone else. Now, those two wanted to separate me from the last thing that I had of him. I was not going to take this lying down. That house was not theirs, it was my father's. Update, can you believe that my stepfather had no idea that the house was in my name? You should have seen the look on his face when I kicked him and his stupid daughter out. It felt so good to get rid of that trash. They had shown their true colors, and I acted accordingly. I agree with the theory that someone in the comments had. My stepfather saw a woman who had assets. She had a very beautiful and big house. She was a widow but with a daughter. Now, that would be a problem. The daughter could easily influence her to leave him. The daughter would also get in the way of him getting the house in his name. So what did he do? He pretended to be a good person and earned my trust. When he suggested that my mom get back into her career, I backed him. I thought I'd be safe back here with him. And thus, he successfully separated us. Once we were separated, it was time for him to use his daughter to make me feel unwelcome. He started to withdraw from me emotionally and showed that affection to his daughter. That would lead to my complaining, getting mad, and acting irrationally. He assumed that the house was in my mother's name. So his main goal was to get me kicked out for basically being a bitch. My mother would believe it because she had only ever seen him be kind to me. She trusted him with her life. She would sooner believe that her daughter was being hostile towards her stepdaughter. She would never believe that the man she married wasn't good. One thing my mother hates is being wrong. He knows that, and he uses it to trick her. His last part was probably to live in that house with his daughter while my mother was away. He would probably get her to get the house in his name in a couple of months. Soon after, he will divorce her and get half of her assets. Or he would get rid of her and cash out. But then again, some of you wanted to play devil's advocate. Of course, I had to hear you out and set the record straight. There was someone who said I could have prevented this if I had just allowed my stepsister to stay with me. She would have to be a nice person that I can live with for me to do that. She was not, she was the worst. Whenever she used the kitchen, she did not clean up after herself. Whenever she was around, money went missing in the house. Whenever she was around, the house was always a mess. She went into my room without my permission several times and used my things. I know this because I have a particular order in which I leave my things. I can easily notice if someone touches my things. So no, I was not going to live with someone like that permanently. Now, let's go back to what happened earlier this week. I went and got all the paperwork I needed for me to make this eviction legal. I was not going to play around and leave any loopholes for them to come back. It took me a while, but everything got fast-tracked with the help of a friend of mine. As soon as I got everything in order, I went to the house. I knocked, and my stepsister opened the door. She tried to shut it in my face and told me that I was not welcomed. I pretended to be sad and said that I was there to apologize. She was very confused because this was so out of character for me. Her dad then came from behind her and asked what I was doing there. I then let them know that they had about 8 hours to get everything that belonged to them out of the house. I was actually being quite generous because he had a lot of furniture in the house. I told him that I would be back. I also showed him the court order. I told him that if he did not pack his things, I would have to forcefully remove him. I would throw out anything that he held of value. My only concern would be getting the scum out of my house. I was dead serious when I said that. But he did not seem to take me seriously. He told me that I could not do this without my mother's permission. He told me that everything that I had done was illegal and he was going to get me arrested. So I told him to make all the calls that he wanted. The only thing they would do was make him look like a fool. Edit, they left the keys with the neighbor and were nowhere to be found. They thought they were going to get me kicked out of my childhood home. The delusion between those two is enough to make a soap opera. Anyway, I'll let myself relax lounging in my father's house without anyone interrupting me. The past couple of days have been hard for me, and I need to relax. Update, how foolish was I to think that everything was over? My mother decided that she was going to punish me because she did not get her away. I had been ignoring her calls for days because I had nothing to say to her. About 2 weeks later, she struck for the first time. I went for an appointment to get my teeth checked out. Once I was done, I found out that I had to pay for everything out of pocket. My dentist alerted me to the fact that my medical insurance was not valid. This was a surprise to me because I'd always been insured. When I made a few calls, I found out that my mother had removed me as a beneficiary of her medical insurance. She did not even let me know so that I could get my insurance. I'm sure she did this so that when I went for an appointment, would have to pay out of pocket. The cost of the appointment set me back. When I saw what she did, I was pissed off. But I was not going to give her the satisfaction. If she wanted to talk, then she would come back home, and we would talk face to face. Since she wanted to rely on someone who was not even related to her, I owed her nothing. I got my insurance sorted out. After that, I decided to sign her out of all of my streaming subscriptions. My mother was not one for technology, she had gotten into streaming because of me. When she found out that some of her favorite all-time shows were online, she asked me to help her set up an account. I wanted to save money, so I decided to add her to mine since she was already doing so much for me. I guess one would say we had quite a symbiotic relationship. And that is why our breakup is so messy. I know it's weird for me to describe my mom and I fighting as a breakup. It kind of feels like that because we have always relied on each other. That is until she let a man get in between us. After that, it was very hard for me to trust her. When my mom found out that her streaming platforms were not working, she decided to email me. She sent me quite a passive-aggressive and formal email. This time, I responded to her and told her that her services had been cancelled because she could not pay my bills. If I had to pay my medical bills, then she would have to pay for her subscription services. I could imagine how upset and angry she was. I could play that game, I could also be petty. I learned from the best, her. By the time she went to cancel anything that linked me to her, I'd already removed myself. Sure, she had been supporting me financially in some areas of my life. She's the one who insisted because she did not want me to leave the nest. But it was clear that now she was kicking me out of the nest. But I knew that my greatest battle was yet to come, for she was coming back home in a month. I knew that she was going to put up a big fight for the house, and I was prepared. I will not go to stand down no matter what trick she had up her sleeve. It was just so sad that we had been pitted against each other by her husband. Now more than ever I wish that my father was still alive. He was always the buffer between us when our tempers rose. He always knew the right way to solve conflict and leave everyone happy. I'm sure that he would not want us to be fighting over all this. But she made her choice, and it broke my heart. I am her baby. How could she do this to me? Update, I am writing this with a broken heart. This is one of the few times that my mother is wrong, and I am right. I wish that it was the opposite. Now, my mother is lying in the hospital after suffering from a heart attack. I pray that they find David and make him pay for this. I knew that he could not be trusted, but I never knew that his heart was so cold. My mom took so long to get back into the dating game and trust any man. So why did he have to break her heart like this? It had been about 2 months since my mom returned from overseas. When she came back, we fought over the house, but ultimately, the house was mine. She tried to take me to court, but the judge overruled her. So she moved out and got an apartment with David. We had no contact for those 2 months. In the beginning, I was victorious because I had gotten the house to myself. I felt like I had won against them, but after a while, I started to feel quite sad. I missed my mom so much. I've not been away from her for such a long time, and it had been killing me. But pride got the better of me, and I decided not to contact her. I wish I had reached out even once. Maybe she would have opened up to me. Maybe I would have seen the signs that this man was slowly taking over everything that she owned. By the time we spoke, he had emptied all of her bank accounts and had already left the apartment. She came back to find that he had taken all of his essential belongings. He left her a note, thanking her for the money and letting her know that she should have trusted me. He also confessed that his daughter was not his daughter. Instead, she was his partner. This was too much for my mother to take. She started to cry. She could not eat, she could not talk, and could not leave the house. Someone at work noticed that she had not been in the office for a while. So they called me and asked me about her. I told them that I was not in contact with her, and she stopped talking to me. The next thing I knew, I was getting a call from the hospital to let me know that my mother had collapsed. She had gone to the store and randomly gotten a heart attack. When I went to her apartment and looked through her stuff, I found the letter that he left her. That monster earned her trust and then took everything that she had ever worked for, including the trust. She is awake, and I have been speaking to her. She has told me everything that she knows, and I have filed a complaint with the cops. There is not much hope of finding them. I have given the cops all the information that I have. But now, All I can do is be by my mother's side as she fights for her health. I wish I had not listened to my stupid head. I should have listened to those of you who told me not to throw away my relationship with my mother over a house. Maybe I should have reached out and apologized to her. Maybe I should have investigated David before Elle even allowed him to put a ring on my mother. There are so many things that I regret. Have you ever done something so drastic that has changed the trajectory of your life? Update. Hey everyone. I was not sure that I was going to post another update. My main focus was just going to be on my mom and helping her heal. But I feel like I owe it to all of you to let you know about the latest development. The cops worked overtime to find David and Sarah. It turned out that those were not even their names. Sarah was not 23 years old, she was a decade older. They have been scamming people all over the country for several years now. They managed to trace them to a certain city. But by the time they got there, they found out that the two had managed to escape. It was believed that they had escaped to a country where there was no extradition. That meant that they got away with it. As you can imagine, my mother and I were not happy about this at all. We were furious and heartbroken. We felt as if the whole world had just failed us. So, I just focused on nursing my mother back to health, and I'm rebuilding the trust in our relationship. Until the day we got the call. David was no more, and Sarah was in police custody. According to her, he has been killed in a deal that went wrong. Someone called the cops, and she was taken in as a witness. Her prints matched her real name in the system. They also linked her to several cases of fraud and embezzlement. The cops were then able to determine that this was the Sarah we had been looking for. As for David, it is believed that he bled out for about several minutes before he met his end. Sarah panicked and did not call, so she tried to save him to no avail, which was when someone saw what was happening and called the cops. By the time the cops arrived, she was in too much shock to do anything but go with them. I think that I'm going to visit her as soon as I can. I need to look her in the eye after what she did. I want to see remorse reflected on her face. If I do not see that, then she will wish she had met David's fate. First of all, I want to thank all of you for the support that you have given me through this difficult time. It has not been easy to get my mother back to health. This is not her first heart attack. It scared me and made me feel that I was going to lose her. Trust me, I regret every petty thing that I have done. As for her, she is very sorry as well. She regrets taking David's side. She has promised that from now on, she is going to be very cautious when it comes to strangers. It is about a day since Sarah was sentenced. She got a life sentence because of the severity of her crimes. It appears that she has been doing this for several years. When asked why she and David returned to the country, it was because of an ex of David who had left him a substantial amount of money. This was someone that he had done a romance scam on. It appears that she forgot to remove him from her will. He took the risk because of greed, even though Sarah tried to stop him. When he arrived to meet with the lawyer, he was ambushed by this woman's sons. They are the ones who attacked him and killed him. As they say, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. This was coming to him sooner or later. I'm glad that he cannot harm anyone else. And where he has gone, he will repent for everything that he has done. Just because he's not in jail does not mean that he's escaped punishment. As with Sarah, she is going to grow old in that jail. She's going to die in that jail and will never breathe free air ever again. She got what she deserved, and I'm very satisfied. I told my mother about my posts, and she wanted me to include a little piece of advice for parents. She wanted to say that things like this are more common than one might think. She suggested that parents should always make sure that their kids are taken care of before they remarry. At least my dad had made sure that my name was on the title deeds of the house, otherwise, we would have lost the house to them. She also said that you should be careful who you let into your house because they might not be who you think they are. I agree with her, as we have all learned. At least we got lucky. I have heard of people who do not get as lucky as us, and I feel so sorry for them. Entitled parents refused to pay for my college, but happily funded my spoiled brother's lazy lifestyle for years. I finally exposed their lies at a family wedding. So I, 33M, recently attended my cousin's wedding, and there was an incident during the after-party with my parents. My parents and I aren't on the best of terms, and we try to avoid speaking to one another as much as we can. The reason is my younger brother, Jack, 29M, who is pretty much the golden child. Growing up, nothing was ever his fault, and he got whatever he asked for, which wasn't the case for me. And the older he grew, the more entitled and bratty he became. So he and I aren't exactly in touch either. I cut my parents out of my life after they told me that they wouldn't be paying for me to go to college, and I had to arrange everything myself. That was many years ago, and in recent times, we have been civil to each other at family gatherings, but that's about it. Jack and I don't speak at all, even when we meet, and I'm okay with that. Because I don't think he is the kind of guy that I would want to be on speaking terms with either. He is a grown man-child who still lives with his parents and spends most of his weekends playing video games with his online friends while emptying can after can of beer. Now, a couple of days ago I attended my cousin's wedding, like I said. And there, my relatives and I were just sitting around, chatting and drinking after the ceremony, like one does. Out of nowhere, my family came around and joined the conversation, which I thought was a little strange because they usually try to avoid me. But I didn't think much of it, and it wasn't as if I could tell them to leave me alone because a lot of people were sitting around us and it wasn't really a private conversation. Once they were seated, the conversation suddenly turned to me when my dad asked me how my job was going. I'm a banker and I recently received a significant raise along with my promotion. I celebrated it with a couple of my friends by going out to a bar last weekend. But that's none of my family's business, so I told him that it was going well and ended my sentence there. But my parents were not willing to drop it, so then my mother asked me if there was something more that I wanted to share with the family. I said no, so my dad told me to drop the act and said that he was aware of the promotion and the raise. I was a little surprised, but I wasn't comfortable discussing this with so many of my relatives sitting around us. So I told him that I didn't think that it was any of their business and tried to excuse myself so I could go to the loo, but I honestly just wanted to get the hell out of there. However, my father told me to sit back down, so we could talk about this like a family. When he said that, I got annoyed because I didn't think of him as my family whatsoever, and I am pretty sure that they didn't consider me family either. And they proved me right when my father said that in spite of earning so much, I couldn't contribute and give back to my parents who had worked so hard to raise me and give me everything that I wanted as a child. And now that they were on the brink of retirement, I was turning my back on them and being incredibly ungrateful and selfish. All my other relatives were either looking at their phones or at the floor because they knew that this wasn't a conversation that they were meant to be a part of. It was a clear attempt by my parents to humiliate me and pressure me into giving them money, and I knew why they needed the money as well. You see, my brother doesn't have a job and is still relying on our parents to provide for him. And his lifestyle is not one that's very affordable. He wants to go out clubbing and drinking with his friends almost every other weekend, and he wants to buy every new gizmo because he fancies himself to be a tech geek or whatever. And these things come at a cost, which my parents are probably struggling with. Both of them are close to retirement now and need to start thinking about life after that as well. They can't exactly continue to support my brother forever. And I knew that they were trying to humiliate me in front of my relatives so that I would agree to send them money to save face in front of these people, and then they would hold that against me and continue to enable the golden child. But I wasn't going to let myself fall for that, and even though I was pretty embarrassed, I decided to retaliate and treat them the same way that they were treating me. So I snapped at them and brought up the way they had laughed in my face all those years ago when I had asked them to cover my college tuition. They had told me back then that they only had enough funds for one kid to go to college, and that was not going to be me, so I had to look out for myself. And I kid you not, they had actually laughed when I brought it up with them as if I had cracked some joke. But I guess it was fair because that's what I really was to them, a joke. However, now that they could see that I was earning and my brother was not, they wanted me to contribute to the family. And I knew that this was just a way for them to continue pouring money down my brother's throat. So I brought up that incident and told them that they had not spent a single dollar more on me than whatever was necessary, and had only let me live in their house and provided for me up until I turned 18. Which was pretty much the bare minimum that they could do for me. And they did it, not because they wanted to, but because it was required by the law. So they needed to stop acting like they did it out of kindness rather than obligation. I didn't even realize it, but I kind of got choked up while talking about it and had to rush to the loo, so I wouldn't break down in front of them. I just didn't want to give them that satisfaction. When I came back out, the crowd had dissolved and nobody was sitting in that area anymore. So I headed out and went back home. I tried not to think about it for the next couple of days, but then my brother reached out to me and told me something that blew my mind. Apparently, the news of our confrontation at that wedding had been doing the rounds of gossip among my relatives, and unfortunately, it had reached some people that my parents wouldn't want in on this huge secret about me having to cover my college expenses myself. They had borrowed money in the past from a couple of their relatives and told them they needed it to cover my tuition, as well as my brother's, and had promised to return it in a couple of years. But now, several years have passed and they still haven't returned that money. And whenever they were contacted by those relatives, they claimed that they were still struggling financially, even when they weren't and were actually pretty comfortable. They would just be too stingy to return the money that they had borrowed and were using it all to fund my brother's lifestyle. And now, my brother told me that those people had found out about their lies because of what I said at the wedding, and 3 people had filed a lawsuit against my parents, demanding their money back. They hadn't done that so far because they believed that my parents were struggling and didn't want to add to their troubles. But now that they knew the truth, there was nothing that was going to make them hold back. But my brother wanted me to talk to them and convince them that I had just been lying to save face at the wedding because I didn't want to admit that I had been a bad son in front of so many of my relatives. He wanted me to convince them to take back the lawsuits, so our parents could think of something to get them out of trouble. I thought that it was a ridiculous idea and declined, but now he and my parents are demanding that I get them out of trouble because I am the one who got them into this situation. So Ida for telling my relatives the truth about how my parents hadn't paid for me to go to college? Update 1. So I blocked my brother and I decided to go ahead and post my side of the story online for everybody to see. Just in case they had any more tricks up their sleeve. I had a feeling that they would try to make themselves the same as the victims, so I made my move first, and I don't feel bad about it because I'm just telling people the truth. They might have borrowed some more money from people who are not even related to us, and they deserve to be in the loop as well. In a way, I'm just doing good for the world and looking out for other people. My parents and my brother have each other to look out for them, unlike me. Because I pretty much always had to look out for myself in that household. So now they'll know how I felt. I can't even believe that my brother tried to guilt trip and manipulate me into lying to cover up for my parents and thought that it'd work. To be honest, even while I was making that post, I knew deep down that most people would agree. I didn't do anything wrong. And the responses to my post just reaffirmed what I already knew. So thank you guys for being on my side and not letting me doubt myself. And I'll also answer some of the very common questions that people were asking in the comments. For starters, I'm not familiar with these relatives who my parents borrowed money from, and neither have I ever even met them. So I don't know why they decided to help my parents out, but I guess they were just really kind people and my parents decided to take advantage of that. That's the only possible explanation I can come up with. And I don't think reaching out to them to figure out why they gave my parents the money right now is a good idea. All I am hoping is that these people have some paperwork or documents to show that my parents had borrowed that money and intended to return it, or else I don't think they even have a case against them, which would be a bummer for me. Some of you had also asked about my grandparents, and I really don't know what to say about that. I hadn't ever really been close to any of my grandparents. My mom's parents passed away a couple of years ago, but my dad's parents are still alive. It doesn't matter though, because I have never been in touch with them, and even they considered my brother to be the better sibling, so they're just irrelevant. They were not the ones who helped me pay for college, contrary to popular belief. No, it was actually all just me, and I worked through college to pay off my tuition along with a little help from a couple of my friends and their parents. I did return all the money to everybody that I had borrowed from eventually after I got my first job. But I never asked for any help from my parents or my family. So I made it on my own, and my parents had no part to play in it. Back then, that was kind of disappointing for me, but now, I can proudly say that I accomplished it all myself, and that's something I'm really proud of. So I hope that answers all the questions that you guys had about me and my life and clears up everything. I don't know what's going to happen next with my parents and my brother, but whatever happens, I'm going to keep you guys in the loop. I think you folks are pretty much a part of this now, haha. Update 2. Okay, it's been 2 weeks since my first post here, and like I said, a couple of my relatives are suing my parents for not returning their money. And thankfully, they did have proof according to what I heard. So my parents are in big legal trouble right now. But for some reason, they are being idiots about it, and instead of focusing on their defense, they think it's a good idea to come after me and try to harass me into taking their side and admitting that whatever I said at the wedding was a huge lie that I made up to make them look bad. They visited me, along with my brother, a couple of days ago. Probably to try and intimidate me or something equally ridiculous. I can understand the desire to set everything right by scaring me into telling a lie about myself, because they know that they are in a pretty screwed up situation right now. And their only bet is to make me look like the bad guy. So anyway, they showed up and I almost didn't open my door because I could see that it was them. But then my brother kept knocking for several minutes, and out of sheer annoyance, I let them in, but I told them to make it quick because I didn't want to waste my day on them. My father was pretty point blank and told me that he needed me to lie to cover up for them because they couldn't afford to pay back everybody at once. And needed me to buy them some time. Obviously, now that the cat was out of the bag, it would be difficult to get it back in, but he wanted me to at least try, for the sake of our family and our reputation. I found it pretty ironic that they were talking about family and stuff like that when we didn't even speak to each other for so long. And I'm pretty sure that in a real family, people at least talk to each other and don't try to manipulate and use the others to their advantage. I told them that I really didn't consider them family anymore, and they needed to stop bringing that up again and again. Because it was painfully obvious to me what they were trying to do. They couldn't emotionally manipulate me into taking their side on this, and they definitely were not going to try and guilt trip me anymore. None of their mind games were going to work with me, because so far, I know what kind of people they are, and I know that they will stop at nothing to get what they want. So I wasn't falling for any of their little tricks. And when the emotional manipulation didn't work, my brother resorted to other means. By that, I mean that he tried to force me and threatened to put up dangerous posts to defend me and get me fired from my hotshot job if I didn't comply with them. It was a pretty pathetic attempt, because I just told him that if he did any of that, then they could add another lawsuit to their already ongoing list of troubles, because I'd also be filing for a defamation lawsuit against them. That shut him up, but my mom got all defensive and told me that I had no right to try and scare him like this, especially after everything that I had done to the family. I didn't like that, because I hadn't done anything to the family. They had brought this all on themselves by lying to people and borrowing money from relatives to fund and enable their golden child. I had no part to play in any of this. And for her to make it sound like I was the one responsible for this was just wrong. Because I didn't make them take money from their relatives, never return it, and then come up with stupid excuses to avoid paying them back for years. I didn't raise my little brother to be an entitled man-child with no passion or goals, capable of doing literally nothing. That was all on them. So if they wanted to pat somebody on the back for that, they could do it to themselves and keep me out of it. I actually said all of this to my parents, and then I told them to get the hell out of my house because they were wasting my day off and I had more productive and fun things to do. My brother registered at first and got all up in my face, trying to intimidate me. and said that I wasn't going to get away with this and he was going to make sure of that. Which was totally hilarious to me because what was he even going to do? Throw his video game controller at me? Or get his 20-year-old online weirdos to cyberbully me? That really ticked him off, and when I told him to brush his teeth more often if he was going to get so close to people to intimidate them, he went completely red in the face and my mom had to drag him away. But it was pretty satisfying for me to watch him struggle to hold back because I knew that he was powerless here and so were my parents. And it felt like just a huge victory to me. Because after years of being targeted by them, I finally had them begging for help, but I was not going to help them, so they were going to feel exactly the way I had felt when I asked them to pay for me to go to college and they laughed in my face. Update 3. Hey, so it's been a couple of weeks since my parents visited me, and from what I've been hearing, things haven't been going well for them. My relatives have been saying that they have been going around and telling literally everyone they meet about how they are struggling to keep up with the bills as well as paying the lawyer. And now they also have to worry about how they are going to pay these people back, especially as they are about to retire in a couple of years, and this is just coming at the wrong time. Of course, the easiest solution for them would be to just make their younger son get a real job and do something with his life, so he can contribute to the household expenses. But they are not going to do that because they want to spoil him rotten. And they're succeeding at that job because he most certainly is pretty rotten on the inside. They have also been telling people that I felt bad about what I did at the wedding and how I created so much trouble for them, especially after the wonderful childhood that they had given me. And out of guilt, I had apparently offered to pay for the lawyer for them. But my parents had rejected it because they had felt very insulted by me at the wedding, and they bragged about how I couldn't buy them out. A couple of my relatives talked to me about it and told me that while they were impressed by how mature and generous I was, they weren't sure if trying to help my parents out was the best thing to do because they weren't exactly trustworthy. I had to reassure them that my parents had been lying and I had done no such thing as they were claiming. Anytime any of my relatives talked to me about this, I clarified to them that whatever my parents told them was a complete and total lie. Then I told them the real version of what happened, where my family approached me and started begging me to help them out by lying and taking back what I said so it could buy them some time. And then, my brother tried to threaten me or whatever it is that he was trying to do. I'm still not sure. And that makes a lot more sense to them than whatever nonsense story my parents had fed them so they don't come out looking bad. It's amazing to me how they still care so much about how their relatives perceive them. They are in so much legal trouble, but they're still trying to portray me as the villain in their story, even when nobody's buying it. I guess their priorities are pretty clear. Literally, nothing is more important to them than making me look bad, lol. Update 4. Okay, so I recently learned that my parents lost all 3 cases against them. And they have to pay back the people they had borrowed money from within the next couple of months, which sucks for them, I guess. But it's great for me. I was really happy when I heard that. Of course, my relatives were the ones who told me about this, and they found out because my parents started whining almost immediately about how I had absolutely ruined them and now they would never have any money left after they retired. Even now, they are blaming me for this instead of acknowledging and accepting that this is just the consequence of their own actions. I can't even begin to imagine the mental gymnastics that it would require to come to a conclusion like this after everything that has taken place. It's not surprising though, because I always knew that their life practically revolved around me, even though my brother was the golden child. It was always me who they wanted to put down and portray as the villain in all their stories, so I guess they're making the most of this opportunity to be the talk of the town for all the wrong reasons. Unfortunately, they don't realize that this is not a good thing and nobody has anybody's sympathy for them whatsoever. They just want attention and that's it. They don't care where it comes from and for what reasons they receive it, as long as people are talking to them and about them. They just want an opportunity to whine to people about how difficult their life is because of me, and it's more evident now than ever. Update 5. So, I have great news and I can't wait to share it with you guys. And I hope that it brings as much joy to you as it did to me. Are you guys ready for it? My brother had to get a job. That's right. I actually feel like the king of the world right now because this is a day that I have been waiting for most of my adult life. The day that I would see my brother pushed into actually working instead of just sitting at home and playing games. I had to work my way through college and make my own path myself, while my brother never had to worry about any of it because he had my parents backing him up. But now, it feels like the universe has brought justice to our family in the most beautiful and poetic way possible. When I was in college, I had to work as a cashier at the diner to be able to pay for stuff. And I recently learned that my brother has had to get a job as a cashier at the video game store because revenge is a dish best served cold. I couldn't believe it when I heard it, so I had to drive all the way to where he works. I even sacrificed my lunch for it, but it was completely worth it when I saw the look on his face as soon as I walked into the store. And I relished the opportunity to walk around and make him uncomfortable and angry. It was a petty thing to do, but boy, did I enjoy myself. Before I left, I even asked him if our parents cried on his first day of work like they had on his first day of school, and he just flipped me off and told me to leave. But I just loved the sight of that, and I really don't think that this year could get any better. Caught my wife cheating on me with a C-list actor, so I leaked the secret video she recorded. Now she's in jail for illegally filming him and he's suing her for ruining his career. Hey guys. So I'm going through a pretty shitty situation with my wife and I honestly can't figure out how to proceed, so I decided to come and ask for help seeing as the regulars here have been trained by hundreds of stories somewhat similar to mine. So, my wife and I are both 36 years old and we've been married for exactly 8 years now. The whole situation sucks even more because our anniversary was 2 weeks ago. Anyway, the only background you really need to know is that we don't have any children and we've always been big fans of TV and movies. It might sound boring, but she doesn't really have any major hobbies beyond that, and I used to game but kind of fell out of love with it as I grew older. So, and this is important, there's a show that airs that I kind of like and that my wife loves. I don't want to say too much to identify it, but it's about to head to a 4th season and it's pretty popular. A particular actor in the show has always caught my wife's eye, and it can be a very annoying thing to experience because I've dealt with women who obsess over attractive celebrities. It can be tiring. You can be right there in the room and they'll start gushing about him, but you know if you did the same thing over some supermodel, she wouldn't speak to you for a week. Double standards. Anyway, this actor, let's call him Nolan so I don't need to give too much away, I'm trying not to find myself in any trouble if I might be susceptible to that. He's not popular. If you watch the show in question, you'll know his face, but most people have never seen him in anything else, so he's far from an A-list actor like Willem Dafoe or DiCaprio. It's hard to even claim he's B-list because his only well-known production is one TV show. Sure, his filmography page has several other movies and shows, but none of them were ever popular, and as something of a cinephile, I feel I'm in a good spot to make that claim. So yeah, I'm going to call him a C-lister, and that's not out of spite for what eventually goes down. So, let me take you all back to a conversation I've had with my wife, once in a full, and been reminded of several other times. She saw the guy on the TV and said a bunch of nonsense about how he's so handsome, his body is so hot, his voice is so sexy, and on and on. Then, out of nowhere, she says, I want him to be my hall pass. I was very confused by this, so I asked her to clarify what a hall pass is, because those only fit into a high school context in my mind, so it didn't make sense. Well, I bet that a lot of you know, but for those of you who don't, a hall pass is a stupid slang term for the one person that someone in a committed relationship can sleep with without it being considered as cheating. When she said this, I remember I audibly scoffed and told her how stupid it was that she'd even say something like that to me. It devolved into a whole argument that night, but before I slept, I realized that it was basically impossible that she'd ever get the chance to sleep with Nolan. It was mainly the disrespect of saying that you still desire outsiders sexually that got to me. If you feel that much lust towards someone, fine, but to admit it to your husband is crazy. Honestly, for the next couple of days, I was still reeling from the disrespect, and I even wanted to come up with some mega hottie to claim as my hall pass in front of her, but it just seemed childish. I decided to be a mature adult at that moment, and I spoke to her at length about how disrespected I felt with the hall pass comment and her thirsting over him, generally speaking. She apologized, though it didn't really seem like she understood why, and we left it at that. Over the next few months, maybe 6 or 7 months, she slipped up at least 5 times. Watching the show or seeing him on social media, and she'd make stupid comments pertaining to how drop-dead gorgeous Nolan was. The first 2 times I told her off, but after that, I gave up because I was tired of having uncomfortable conversations. However, it just made me wonder why not doing things that disrespect me was so hard for her. I've slipped up before on things she's been vocal about that she doesn't like, but I've never repeated the offense more than once. So, obviously, over the months, Nolan became more of a sore spot for me. I started to get pissed off every time I'd see his face in the show. Again though, he was just a face on a screen, so there was really nothing to worry about, right? Wrong. A convention was coming to the city next to us, and thanks to Nolan's Instagram page, my wife found out that he was going to be doing a meet and greet thing there. She didn't consult me on her going, but instead informed me that she was going too, and spent the 2 weeks leading up to it gushing nonstop. At that point, I really loved her, but the obsession was irritating me deeply. In fact, at a point, I got so frustrated that I blurted out, I really don't think it's a good idea for you to go if you're going to act obsessed like this. She just shot me a horrible look, but I decided to insist, and I said, I really don't think you should go. It's a city over and you didn't even consult me before making a decision. She said nothing, and just left the room, and honestly, I was happy to have gotten it out of my system that I let it go. I assumed that she had gotten the point. Well, until the day of the actual meet and greet, when I saw her wheeling her suitcase to the door. I asked her where she was going, and she told me to the other city, for the meet and greet. I think my mouth dropped open because I really didn't think she was going to go through with it. My ride's on the way. I'm going with Susie, a friend of hers who had twice been unfaithful to her husband, though the poor chap had no idea, and we're going to stay the night there in a hotel, so I don't need to come back at night. I'll be back tomorrow morning. To say I was enraged would be an understatement because this whole situation was really touching a sensitive area for me. But I decided I'd let her go and we'd deal with the aftermath of the whole thing after. In retrospect, that was a bad idea, but it's not like I was going to physically restrain her, so I guess I had no choice. I should have tried harder to stop her from going, but I guess if I did, I wouldn't know what I know now. So, the entire day went by with basically no communication from my wife beyond her sending a dry text letting me know when she got to the bus station and when she arrived in the other city, and then she basically went dark, until the next morning. I swear, I called at least 7 times at intervals but got nothing from her, which was incredibly stressful. We were not on good terms, but it doesn't change the fact that I thought she could have been in some kind of danger in a city she wasn't entirely familiar with. I ended up turning into an Instagram stalker. I kept checking the stories of the convention and Nolan, hoping to catch a glimpse of my wife, and among about 34 stories that were posted in total, I finally saw her in one. So I knew she got to the convention safely. It helped put me to rest a bit, but I was still pretty pissed. 7 missed calls, and she didn't have the decency to return one of them. It would just be added to the list of issues we had when she got back. Anyway, as promised, the next morning, I was woken up by the sound of the door to our house closing. My wife had gotten back from her trip, and as much as all I wanted to do in that moment was go back to sleep, there was a discussion that needed to be had. She came upstairs and found me sitting on the bed. I remember her pulling a really awkward smile as she went to push her suitcase into the corner. "How was the meet and greet? Did you meet Nolan?" I tried to say that with as little edge as possible, but I'm certain some came out. The meet and greet was nice. Yes, I did meet him, along with a few others from the show. It was nice to see these people in real life. I'm glad you got to experience that. Now, we need to. Before I was able to get out the rest of the sentence, she jumped in, tears welling in her eyes already. "I know, baby. I'm so sorry. I should have asked if you were fine with me going instead of just choosing to go on my own. That wasn't fair at all. And I was annoyed with how things went earlier on, which was why I didn't pick your calls. But I'm so sorry. The calls at night, Susie and I went to a bar and I left my phone behind, so I didn't know you called." To be honest, I was disarmed by her apologizing because that was extremely unlike her. So while it was supposed to make me feel a lot better, something just felt off about it. But I decided that I'd do the thinking later. I asked her if I could see some of the pictures that she took, and she obliged happily. Now, it was at this point that I noticed a red flag. She angled the phone away from my face as she was looking for pictures. It was subtle, but I'm sure it was intentional. Only after opening a picture did she let me see the pictures she took, including some smiling beside Nolan, though she was the one holding her phone and swiping through them. If you have a Samsung Galaxy phone, you'll know that when you're in the gallery and scrolling through images, there's a little bar at the bottom of the screen that contains thumbnails of all the photos and videos in that folder. I saw something there. I was tiny, but it looked like a large swathe of skin tone, like some section of a naked body. I don't think she took that into account when she was showing me the photos, and again, I really couldn't say with any certainty what I was looking at. It came chronologically after the convention events though. That much was clear. I let her keep showing me the images until she was through, and I made the expected comments about Nolan being good looking, how I was glad she had met her favorite, and a lot of other jazz. But I knew what I needed to do as I was saying all of this, so once I was done and she was done, I encouraged her to go and take a shower to freshen up, and she agreed to do so with a big smile. Once I heard the water start running, I grabbed her phone right away and went to her gallery. There was one video as the very last piece of media in her gallery and I played it right away. It started off in a dimly lit room. It looked like a hotel room with soft, warm lights, and there was someone close to the camera. I could hear voices, but I couldn't turn up the volume because I didn't want her to hear. But the person near the camera seemed to be propping it up, and once they got it stable, they moved away from it. It was my wife. She was naked. She went to lie down on the bed, and it seemed she was waiting for something. Suddenly, the voices I could hear got a bit clearer as it seemed someone else emerged from the bathroom. The person was naked too, and I didn't even need to see the face clearly to see that it was Nolan. He moved towards my wife and climbed onto the bed. The video was 11 minutes long, and I had to stop there. I couldn't watch any more. I quickly sent the video over to my phone, cleared any evidence from hers, and I left the house. I didn't know where I was going, but my head was swirling and my heart was pounding. I think I walked for like 20 minutes before I decided it was time to watch the video I had taken off her phone. Watching it in full was horrible for me. Is there really anything worse than watching your wife get pounded by some actor that you've started to hate because she likes him so much? Why did she actually get the chance? Did she throw herself at him? Did he actually like her? What was going on? Honestly, it was giving me a headache and I felt so broken. There was nothing I could have done different, and I recognized that much. I didn't have much in my head as to what I was going to do next, but I know I have to divorce her. That much, a fool could tell you. See, being cheated on feels like shit, but it literally could have been anyone else in the world and it wouldn't have hurt this much. That's when I knew I would have to get back at her, and I'd have to make it hurt. So, I eventually headed back home, told her that I had to go for a walk because I was feeling nauseous, and then I did my best to continue to act normal. It's been a full week since I found this out and she's been exceptionally bubbly. Every time she smiles at her phone, I don't know if she's busy chatting with Nolan or something. I've become so paranoid and I'm tired of feeling like this. I need to make her hurt as much as I hurt right now, and that's where I need help because I'm blank on exactly what I can do. I'd love to hear what devious plans I can come up with that I can realistically deploy. Honestly, any suggestions are welcome. Update 1. Hey everyone. It's been a few weeks since my last post, but I've got quite a few updates for you on how things have been going down. I read through pretty much every comment on my original post, and I have to say thank you to everyone for really helping me out. My mind felt like it was in a bog, but I was able to find some clarity, so I'll let you know how things went down. The first thing that I did was to call up a divorce lawyer. I had a close friend who went through a messy divorce but managed to get a pretty good hand dealt to him in the end, so he referred me to his lawyer from back then. We started to get to work. The next thing I did was call up Susie, my wife's very close friend. I asked her to let us meet up, and she agreed to that, so we met at a bar. Now, Susie is loose, let me put it like that. Part of me was tempted to get with her to destroy my wife's friendship with her, but it wasn't the time, if it would ever be. But the whole point of meeting up with her was that if anyone knew anything about what had gone down between my wife and Nolan, that C-list actor she slept with, it would be Susie. Susie is a drinker, so as long as there are shots being paid for by someone else, it's easy to get her mouth running. We had some drinks and shots, she had a lot more than me, and engaged in a bit of small talk. Before we got to the point where she was wasted, I told her I was planning to surprise my wife with a designer bag, and I asked her what she would recommend. She yapped on and on about Chanel and Hermes, and I remember none of the details because that was just meant to be what she would remember. Now, once I noticed that she was really under the influence, I struck. So, Susie, my wife told me everything. I know that she slept with Nolan, that actor? Through her haze, her eyes widened for a second before she went back to normal. How did that happen? I'm just curious, and she refused to tell me. She took another drink, swaying in her seat, before letting me know how my wife had been excessively flirty with Nolan and had passed him a paper with her number on it. My wife is attractive, and as much as I hate her right now, I can admit that. Apparently, she had waited until much later and Nolan had actually sent her a text that was simply a hotel and a room number. More famous actors probably wouldn't have done something so stupid, but he's not a huge player in Hollywood. So, what about the tape? Did he know she made that? That was a suspicion of mine. Nolan might not have known my wife took a video, and if he didn't, that had a lot of potential. A lot. Again, Susie seemed a little shocked that I knew so much, probably surprised that my wife actually came clean. But yep, she confirmed to me that my wife had taken it secretly. She also let me know that she had watched it, along with some of her other girls, and that was infuriating. My wife was basically becoming a porn star for her friends. But I knew I was going to take out the trash very soon. I got all the info I needed from Susie, with the entire conversation recorded, and I ordered her a ride to take her home. Hopefully, Susie wouldn't remember all of this in the morning. I was trying my best not to tip my soon-to-be ex-wife off early. As time went on, the lawyer said things were a go. So, one night a few days later, when we were watching Nolan's stupid show, I told my wife that I wanted to get a divorce. She actually choked on the soda she was drinking, and spluttered for almost a minute. She was fine. She looked at me, nearly hysterical, asking whether I was joking over and over, but I told her that I wasn't. I thought I had prepared for this part, but it was extremely awkward. I really didn't want to reveal everything I knew yet. In the end, I couldn't take all her questioning and crying, so I left the house. She called me 21 times that night, but I didn't pick up a single call. The next morning, I arranged with the lawyer and had her serve the divorce papers at work. Needless to say, that was embarrassing for her. After I got the confirmation, I went back home, because she'd know the reason for the divorce. She came back home within 2 hours of getting served, and when I spotted her, it was clear she had been crying for a long time. She came up to me, got on her knees, and started crying all over my knees, trying to say something, but it only came out as a lot of loud mumbling. It was irritating. It went on for like 20 minutes, and every time I would push her away, she'd start wailing even louder. When I reached my limit, I very sternly asked her to go upstairs to pack her things. She kept crying and crying, and at that point, I managed to hear her saying how sorry she was, how it was a mistake, and on and on. When I heard the mistake part, I actually laughed and shoved her off my knee. She looked at me sadly from the carpet and I stood up and left the room. In a few hours, she was packed and out of the house. Apparently, she's gone to go and stay with Susie, who, even if she remembers anything about that night, certainly won't volunteer that she fed me with info. Anyway, what's left for me is for the divorce to be finalized, because I still have one major trick up my sleeve, but I need things to be officially over before then. Hopefully, I won't lose interest in revenge, but we'll see, friends. Update 2, it feels like it has been ages, but it has been just under a year. However, I'm finally back with what should be the final update, and boy, is it good. So, we've finalized the divorce, and it's not a process I'd want to go through again. It was a lot of back and forth, a lot of stalemating, and just a lot of stress, but it is finally over. I'm going to have to pay alimony, but, thankfully, her infidelity, which she did a poor job of denying, and which I was able to make easy work proving, made the payments a lot less heavy. Plus, the payment term won't be for very long. In the process, I exposed Susie and everything she had let me in on, which was certainly salt to the wound for my wife. A lot of money was split, but I kept the house after an annoyingly long battle on that, and that was good enough for me. Now, once things were clear, this is where I was able to have fun. I had held onto that video since I snatched it off her phone. I mean, Nolan is C-list, but he's still famous and there's nothing Hollywood loves more than gossip. So who did I hit up first? TMZ. Yep. I let them know what I had for them, and I did a very good job of anonymizing even though I don't think they snitch on sources. I'm not used to the tabloid lifestyle, so I was trying to be as careful as possible. Once I proved I had what I claimed I had, I got to talking with a journalist from the tabloid and even made a bit of change off it. Not much, but not too little. I must have refreshed TMZ 100 times after that, waiting for when they'd go live with the story. It wasn't the same day, but it eventually showed up on their website the next day. My favorite touch in the article? They used the name I provided. After all, everyone wanted to know who the mystery woman who got the chance to sleep with Nolan was, and they made it clear that Nolan was unaware of the recording. Using the same throwaway email account I used for my correspondence with TMZ, I sent a link to the article to my ex-wife's email address. At this point, all I could do was wait, especially because I wouldn't directly see what was going on in her life and how she would respond to the article. That's what I thought at least, until she knocked on the door to the house that used to be for both of us, 2 days later. She seemed crazy, and she kept saying, "I know it was you, admit it was you." I kept playing dumb, but I was doing it in an intentionally over-the-top way, because I wanted her to know it wasn't just karma, some universal force punishing her. Nah, she needed to know it was me, and I could almost see the point where she realized I was playing coy. It's like she snapped right then, and she lunged for my throat, clawing and striking. I fell over with the force which she jumped at me with, but it wasn't hard for me to get her off me. Thankfully, a neighbor had seen the whole thing. All her noise had attracted his attention, and the police were there in some minutes after the incident. Yes, I pressed charges, which was very satisfying. Most of her family live in other states and she and Susie had fallen out, so I hoped it took her some time to get someone to post bail for her. Anyway, the assault charge was just a cherry on top for me. I didn't plan for that to happen. The real big thing was her going to court for unlawful surveillance. She recorded Nolan without his consent, and even though she wasn't responsible for the leak, it only existed because she made it illegally. The case went on for quite some time, especially because Nolan wanted punitive damages for the harm the leak caused to his career. Apparently, he lost a job in some movie series aimed at younger audiences because of that. That made me feel good. Unsurprisingly, Nolan's lawyers were a lot higher end than what my wife could afford. She took a bunch of my money, but I was glad to see her wasting it on the consequences of her actions. It genuinely made me very happy every time I heard an update on the case, whether it went her way or not. A certain headline called her a groupie. That was fun. To cut a long story very short, she had to spend 2 months in jail and pay a $1,000 fine. As far as I'm concerned, she got off fairly easy, but I'm allowed to be vindictive, aren't I? Well, fellas. Now that things have settled down, she's in jail right now, which is fun. I feel so much better and I feel very satisfied. All I can say is that if you get a sign that someone is cheating on you, run and never look back. Plus, if you can get revenge in the process, never let the chance go. That's it from me, take care, y'all.